The storm was not just wind, it was a monster. It howled across the frozen valley, ripping through trees, breaking homes, and burying the land in thick, biting snow. The sky was gray, cold, and endless. The world had turned white and cruel. A small figure stumbled through the snow. Her name was Jorana, a young alien mother. Her skin was a pale blue, cracked from the cold. Her long, thin arms held something close to her chest. A small child, wrapped in torn fabric. The child didn't move. His name was Yulo, and he hadn't cried in hours. Jorana's feet bled from walking barefoot. Her tail dragged behind her, heavy with ice. Her eyes were wide but empty. She had lost everything. Her village destroyed by the storm, her home crushed, her family gone. No one had helped. No one had stopped. She knocked on doors. She fell at the feet of soldiers. "Please," she had begged. "My child is dying." But they had only turned away. A poor alien woman? Not worth their time. Not in a storm like this. Now her voice was gone. Her body was shaking. Her legs finally gave up, and she dropped to her knees in the snow. The wind screamed. She hugged Yulo tighter and leaned over him, trying to shield him with her body. Her lips touched his forehead. "Don't sleep yet," she whispered. "Please, little one, stay with me." But his skin was cold. Suddenly, far away, boots crunched in the snow. A man named David was walking alone. A human. He had been driving across the borderlands when his vehicle broke down. He was trying to find shelter on foot. His thick coat flapped in the wind. His beard was covered in frost. He heard the storm. He felt the cold. And then he stopped. There. A sound. Faint. A cry. No, softer than that. A whisper of pain. It came from beyond the rocks. David's instincts kicked in. He moved carefully, stepping over frozen debris past broken metal signs. His flashlight cut through the snow, and then froze on a shape. It was a woman, collapsed, curled around a small bundle. Her skin was not human. She wasn't from Earth. But her body, thin, shaking, bleeding, it was all too real. Her arms were blue and trembling. Her eyes were half open. David stepped closer. The woman blinked weakly, then flinched, as if afraid he would hurt her. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. He kneeled beside her. His hand touched the child, cold, very cold. He reached for his pack and pulled out a thick emergency blanket. He wrapped both of them as best as he could. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said slowly. She couldn't understand, but his voice was soft. His hands were gentle. That was enough. The child's chest wasn't moving. David pressed 2 fingers to the boy's neck. A faint pulse. Very faint. "No time," David whispered to himself. He picked the child up and looked at the woman. She clutched his coat. Her eyes begged without words. David nodded once. "Let's get you both out of here." He pulled her arm over his shoulder. She was light, too light, weak, starving, barely able to walk. He supported her, step by step, as the storm howled around them. A few minutes later, he reached an old service tunnel, half buried in snow but still intact. Inside was dark, but at least it was dry. He kicked the door open and helped them inside. Wind slammed shut behind them. Jorana collapsed against the wall. She couldn't move anymore. She just watched as the human placed her child down on a mat and lit a fire using an old heater unit. He removed the wet rags from the child and wrapped him in warm cloth. Then he gave the woman a small can of water. She drank with shaking hands. David placed his ear close to the boy's chest. He heard a soft sound. A heartbeat. Still alive, he looked at the alien woman. "He'll make it," he said, even if she didn't understand. Her lips moved again. One word. "Yulo," David repeated it. "Yulo, that's his name?" She nodded slowly. and a tear rolled down her cracked cheek. The fire flickered between them. Warmth filled the small space. Outside, the storm still screamed, but inside, a strange silence settled. David didn't know her name yet. He didn't know her story. But he knew one thing. He couldn't leave them. Not now. The shelter was small, built for emergencies long ago. It was made of old metal with walls that creaked when the wind slammed outside. But inside there was warmth now. A weak fire, flickering orange, spreading slowly from the heater David had fixed. Joanna sat on the floor, leaning against the cold wall. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her knees. Her eyes didn't blink much. Her long, alien fingers trembled, still stained with blood and frostbite. She kept her eyes on her child. Little Yulo lay on a blanket, unmoving. David knelt beside him. The boy's skin was pale. His tiny chest rose, then stopped, then rose again. Slow. Too slow. David whispered, "Come on, little guy. Hold on." He placed a warm compress on Yulo's forehead. Then he carefully opened a small packet, liquid sugar and minerals. Emergency energy gel, normally used for soldiers or hikers. Now it might help this boy survive. "Open up," David said softly, but Yulo didn't respond. Joanna let out a soft cry. She crawled forward, touched her son's face, and tried to help. Her fingers moved gently around the child's mouth. She spoke something in her own language, just sounds now, broken by cold lips and pain. David watched, then nodded. Okay, together. They worked as a team, strangers from different worlds, trying to feed life back into a small body that refused to wake up. Minutes passed, then a twitch. Yulo's lips moved. His eyes didn't open, but he made a faint sound. It wasn't a word, but it was something. Anything. Joanna gasped. She covered her mouth, tears rolling down her cheeks. She bent low and pressed her forehead against her son's. Her shoulders shook, but this time they weren't shaking from cold. They were shaking from hope. David stepped back, giving her space. He sat near the heater and rubbed his hands. He looked at the alien mother and her child, and for the first time that day he felt something other than worry. Relief. He watched as Joanna whispered to her son again and again. Her voice was weak but filled with love. She rocked slightly, holding his little hands between hers, trying to warm him with everything she had left. David reached into his bag and pulled out more supplies: bandages, dry socks, a protein bar. He opened the bar, broke it into small pieces, and placed them on a cloth between them. Joanna looked at the food, then at him. Her eyes narrowed, not in fear, just confusion. Was this a trick? David smiled gently and took a small bite from the food to show it was safe. Then he slid the rest closer to her. Joanna hesitated only a second before picking up a piece and slowly placing it in her mouth. Her eyes widened. Her body wanted to reject it, unused to food, but then it remembered. She chewed, swallowed, then took another, and another. The food gave her strength. She straightened up, adjusted the blanket over Yulo, and even tried to brush back her messy white hair with one hand. David spoke softly. "You're safe now, both of you." Joanna couldn't understand the words, but she understood the feeling, the tone, the warmth. She pointed at herself slowly and said, "Anna." David nodded. "Joanna." Then she pointed to the child. Yulo, he repeated. She looked at him. Then slowly, nervously, she pointed at him. David paused, then smiled. David. Her lips tried to say it. David. He chuckled softly. Close enough. Outside, the storm still roared, but inside, something else was building. Something quiet. Something strong. Joanna curled up beside her son and pulled the blanket over both of them. For the first time in days, she felt safe. Her body relaxed, her breathing slowed. Her child was alive. A stranger had saved them, and not just any stranger. A human. David sat near the door, eyes half closed but still alert. He wasn't sure what would happen next. He didn't know if she would trust him for long. He didn't even know if the storm would end soon. But for now, he had done something right. He had stopped. He had helped. He had listened to a cry in the snow when no one else would, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to change everything. Yulo's breath was soft. So soft, David had to lean close just to be sure it was still there. Every time the child exhaled, a tiny cloud puffed into the cold air, but his chest rose and fell now. Steady. Weak, but steady. Jirana didn't sleep. She sat beside her son, staring down at him like she was afraid he would disappear if she blinked. One hand stayed on his tiny chest. The other clutched the necklace. Around her neck, a rough metal circle with a symbol carved in it. Maybe it was religious. Maybe it was just all she had left. David knew she was still in shock. She hadn't spoken since introducing herself. But her eyes said enough. They said thank you. They said fear. They said pain. And something else. Something he couldn't name. Yet, she looked like someone waiting to wake up from a nightmare. David added another piece of wood to the heater and carefully walked to his backpack. He pulled out a thin sleeping mat and laid it near the wall. I don't know how long this storm's gonna last, he muttered to himself. But you're staying here tonight, both of you. He glanced over. Jirana didn't answer. She just looked at him. Suddenly, Yulo let out a soft sound. Not a cry, just a small moan. His lips moved. Jirana leaned down fast. Yulo? Her voice cracked, dry and full of hope. Yulo. The boy blinked slowly. His eyes opened, dull but alive. He looked up, confused, then focused on his mother's face. He didn't say her name, but his hand twitched, reaching toward her. She caught it instantly. Tears exploded from her eyes as she kissed his fingers again and again, whispering in her language. David watched from the side. He didn't understand her words, but he understood her heart. She had been alone in the cold world. Until now. Jirana rocked back and forth, cradling Yulo carefully. The boy coughed, a dry, weak cough, but it was life. His small body curled toward her warmth. David approached slowly and offered her a small plastic cup filled with warm water. Jirana hesitated. Then with one arm she took the cup and pressed it to Yulo's lips. He drank. Just a few drops. But that was enough. The woman looked up at David again, her eyes softer than before. Then she did something unexpected. She bowed her head to him, not much, just a little. But enough to show respect, gratitude, trust. David cleared his throat. You don't have to thank me. Anyone would have done it. But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't true. She had asked others for help. Soldiers, locals, survivors. And they had walked away. He was the only one who didn't. Hours passed. The wind outside howled less now, like a monster growing tired. The storm was fading, but not gone yet. Jirana finally slept. Her body curled around her son like a shield. David kept watch. He didn't sleep. He sat at the entrance of the shelter, rifle across his lap, flashlight off, eyes wide open. He had no reason to protect them. He didn't know these aliens, he didn't even know their kind. But he had seen their pain, their hunger, their loss. And now, he felt responsible. When morning came, the first light pushed through the cracks in the metal walls. Snow had piled, high outside, but the sky was clearer, pale blue like Jirana's skin. David stretched his arms and quietly stepped outside. The snow reached his knees. The land around was destroyed, trees bent, houses broken, smoke in the distance. He sighed and whispered, "Whole world's falling apart." Inside, Jirana slowly woke up. Her first reaction was panic, checking her child. But Yulo was breathing, warm beside her. Then she looked around and realized the human was gone. Her heart jumped. She stood fast, dizzy from hunger, and ran to the shelter's door. But just as she reached it, David came back in, carrying a small bundle of roots and mushrooms. Not much, just enough for a meal. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped too. Then very softly she said in broken common tongue, "You come back." David blinked. "Yeah, of course." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You stay?" David smiled. "Yeah, I'll stay." Joanna stepped aside, letting him back in. For the first time she felt not afraid, not alone. And as the sheltered door shut behind them, Yulo stirred again, whispering something small and sleepy. His voice was weak, but clear. It was the first time his voice had returned since the storm, and it broke the silence. The heater hissed quietly. The smell of warm roots and boiled mushrooms filled the small shelter. It wasn't much, but to Joanna it felt like a feast. She hadn't eaten real food in days. Her hands still trembled as she brought the pieces to her lips. Yulo sat on her lap, half awake, wrapped in a soft cloth David had given them. His eyes were clearer now. His cheeks had a touch of color. He leaned against his mother, tiny fingers clinging to her necklace. David sat a few steps away, chewing quietly. He didn't speak much. He didn't want to scare them, but his presence felt calm, solid, like a wall between them and the world outside. Joanna glanced at him often. At first, she had watched him with fear. Now, it was something else. Caution, yes, but also curiosity. He had no reason to stay. He could have left after saving her son, but he didn't, and she didn't understand why. After the meal, David pulled out a small book from his bag, a notebook with maps, hand-drawn symbols, and tiny sketches. He sat cross-legged and opened a blank page. Then he drew something with a pencil. A fire, a child, a storm, and two figures sitting together. Joanna leaned forward, watching with quiet interest. He looked up at her. "I'm drawing us." She didn't understand the words, but when he turned the notebook toward her, she understood the image. Her lips parted slightly. She pointed at the fire. "Warm," then pointed at the child. "Yulo." David smiled and nodded. "Yes, Yulo." She pointed at the figure with a coat and beard. "Him." Then at herself. David tapped the page. "David, Joanna." They both smiled. It was small, quiet, but real. Then she reached out with her finger and began drawing in the dirt beside her. Her fingers moved slowly. First she drew a house, simple lines. Then a large circle around it with jagged lines. A storm. Destruction. Next, she drew many little figures with X's over them. Gone. Dead. David's heart tightened. It was her home, her family, her people. He stayed silent. Then Joanna drew a single figure in the snow. Her. Alone. With a small dot in her arms. Yulo. And finally, a tall figure beside her, not like the others. He wore a strange helmet and boots. David recognized it. She was drawing him. Her story was simple, tragic, but now she wasn't alone. He nodded slowly and said, "I found you." Joanna didn't know the words, but she looked at him with wet eyes. Her head lowered. Her fingers pressed to her heart. Then she did something unexpected. She took off the necklace from her neck. The metal was worn, old, maybe all she had left from her family. She reached toward David. He froze. She placed the necklace on the floor between them. A gift. David looked at it, unsure. "You sure?" She didn't speak. She just nodded. He picked it up gently and bowed his head. "Thank you, Joanna." Outside, the storm began to die. The wind was still loud, but no longer violent. Snowflakes drifted gently instead of biting like knives. The worst had passed. That evening, Joanna helped prepare the food with what little she knew. She didn't speak often. but her hands worked, beside David's. She offered small alien herbs from her pouch, hidden in her clothing, crushed to make the food tastier. David tried one, coughed hard, and smiled through tears. Spicy, Girana laughed. It was quiet and tired, but it was the first laugh she'd had since the storm began. Later, Yulo fell asleep in his mother's arms. David gave her extra blankets and gestured to the sleeping mat. You sleep. I'll keep watch. Girana hesitated, but then she looked at her son, safe and breathing. She looked at the man by the door, his weapon resting beside him, his back straight, eyes scanning the cracks in the shelter. She trusted him. She laid down, curling around Yulo like before. The boy snuggled closer, mumbling softly in sleep. David listened to the wind ease outside, but his mind stayed alert. He knew the cold wasn't the only danger out here. Desperate people roamed after storms, scavengers, raiders. They didn't care if someone was weak, alien, or just surviving. But tonight, if any threat came, they'd find a human ready. One who wasn't afraid to fight. As Girana drifted to sleep, her hand slid across the ground closer to David's. She didn't touch him, but she rested near him, close enough to feel the warmth of his presence, and for the first time in days, her body stopped shaking. Not because the cold was gone, but because she wasn't alone anymore. The snow had calmed, but inside Girana, the storm still raged. She woke in the night with a scream locked in her throat. Her body jerked upright, her arms instantly wrapping around Yulo, who whimpered in confusion. She looked around wildly, searching for fire, smoke, shadows, anything. That reminded her of that terrible day when her home fell apart. David was already alert. He sat nearby, rifle across his lap, his hand reaching out. It's okay. It's just a dream. Girana didn't understand the words, but his voice was low. Calm. She blinked at him, breath shaking, her blue skin damp with sweat despite the cold. She wasn't in the village anymore. There was no fire, no screams, just the sound of a soft heater and her son's small breath. But in her mind, the memories were still burning. She clutched Yulo tighter and whispered in her language, You're safe. You're here. He didn't take you. David stayed quiet, giving her space. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. The pain in her eyes told him enough. When morning came, Girana sat near the entrance. A blanket draped around her shoulders, and her eyes followed every movement David made, careful, alert. She wasn't afraid of him anymore, but she still looked like someone ready to run at the first sign of danger. David noticed. He walked over slowly and handed her a cup of warm water. Storm's over, he said. Sky's clear. She looked up at him, blinking in the sunlight that leaked through a crack in the metal wall. Then she did something surprising. She spoke slowly, carefully. Clear. Sky? David smiled. Yeah, you're learning fast. Girana nodded once. Then she touched her chest. Girana, he touched his. David? She smiled faintly. Then, looking nervous, she reached into a small pouch tied to her leg. From it, she pulled something hidden and precious, an old photo, dirty and cracked. In the picture were 6 aliens, standing beside a fruit cart. A young Girana was there, holding a baby, her family. She handed it to David. He looked at the photo and then at her. Her face fell as she whispered one word. Gone. David swallowed hard. He looked back at the photo, then returned it gently. I'm sorry. Girana placed it carefully, against her chest, holding it like a wound that never healed. Later that day, they stepped outside together for the first time since the storm. The world was white and quiet, trees bent under heavy snow. The air was sharp but not deadly. Yulo clung to his mother's back, wrapped tight. His tiny hand reached toward the sky and pointed at the sun. Girana smiled at him, but David wasn't smiling. He saw something in the snow. Tracks, boot prints, fresh. Not his. He knelt down, touched the edges of the print. Someone was here. Girana came close, tilting her head. David pointed to the tracks, then made a motion, walking fingers. He said one word. Raiders. Jirana froze. She knew that word. Her body tensed and she held Yulo tighter. David looked around. The prince didn't lead toward them, yet. But they were close enough to worry. They returned to the shelter quickly. Inside, David quietly packed his things. His rifle was loaded, gear tightened. Jirana watched him, panic building. He stopped, saw her fear, and stepped closer. We'll be okay. I won't let them touch you. Jirana stared into his eyes. The storm inside her hadn't ended. But for the first time, she let the fear out in words. They took my sister. David listened. They came after the first storm, took her. She scream. I hide. I had baby. I not move. I not scream. I only listen. David clenched his jaw. You were protecting Yulo. She nodded slowly, eyes glassy. I scared. I not strong. David reached out and gently touched her arm. No, you're the strongest person I've ever met. She looked at him, unsure of his words but feeling their weight. That night, Jirana didn't sleep easily, but she didn't wake up screaming. She dreamed of a time before the storm, a small shop, her sister singing, her child laughing. When she woke, David was sitting outside watching the snow, weapon in hand. He wasn't going to let the past repeat itself, and she knew now. Neither would she. The morning sun was pale, rising slowly over the frozen land. Trees sparkled with frost, and soft snow crunched under David's boots as he stepped outside. His eyes scanned the horizon, every step careful. There were no fresh tracks. Not yet. But he knew what he saw yesterday was real. Raiders. He returned to the shelter quickly. Inside, Jirana was feeding Yulo tiny pieces of cooked root. The boy was stronger today. His eyes followed David as he entered, and his small hand reached toward him. David smiled. Morning, little guy. Jirana looked up and gave a small nod. She still looked tired, but something in her eyes had changed. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was beginning to hope. David sat beside her and gently drew a circle in the dust on the floor. Then he added 3 small dots, himself, Jirana, and Yulo. Around the circle, he drew a bigger one with sharp points. Bad people, he said. They are near. Jirana leaned forward and pointed at the outer ring. Raiders, David nodded. We need a plan. She looked around. Run? He shook his head. Too risky. Yulo is still weak. But if they come, we protect this place. Jirana's eyes narrowed. She reached for a piece of metal in the corner. Broken, sharp. She gripped it tightly and held it like a weapon. David blinked, then smiled. She was ready to fight. For hours they worked together. David used wires, old crates, and tools from his backpack to set traps. Jirana helped, her fingers skilled, fast. She tied sharp glass to trip wires and placed rocks near the doorway to slow anyone who entered fast. Every time they made progress, Yulo clapped softly, not knowing what they were doing, but feeling safe. David showed Jirana how to use his spare flare gun. She had never held a human weapon before, but she learned quickly. He handed it to her. If I'm not here, you use this. She shook her head. You stay. David smiled. I will. That night the wind was quiet. Too quiet. David stayed, awake outside the shelter, wrapped in a thick coat, rifle across his knees. The moon hung low, painting silver lines across the snow. Then, movement. He heard it first, snow shifting, soft crunches. David crouched low behind the shelter wall. Through the trees he saw shadows. 3 figures. Dark coats, tall, armed. They were coming. He moved fast, tapping 3 times on the metal wall. Inside, Jirana understood. She clutched Yulo tight and moved to the hidden corner behind the heater. where David had told her to stay if anything happened. Outside, the raiders walked slowly, weapons ready. One of them laughed. "Probably nothing. Left after the storm," he muttered. Another replied, "Still worth checking. I saw smoke yesterday." As they stepped closer to the shelter door, one of them hit the tripwire. Snap. A trap sprang. A log swung down and slammed into the man's chest, knocking him back into the snow. "What the?" Another stepped forward, only for his leg, to catch a buried wire. Crack! A flare exploded above, lighting the night sky in bright red. David appeared from the side and shouted, "That's far enough!" The raiders turned, shocked to see a human defending this place. "You're alone," one of them sneered. "Move or die." David raised his rifle. "Not alone, and I don't miss." Inside, Zorana heard everything. She kissed Yulo's forehead and whispered, "Stay quiet." Then she crawled silently to the back door, her flare gun ready. Outside, one of the raiders rushed forward, ignoring David's warning. David fired once, into the snow near the man's feet. Next shot, he growled, "Won't miss." Suddenly, bang. Zorana fired her flare gun from the other side. The raiders panicked, seeing they were surrounded. "It's not worth it," one of them shouted. "Let's go." Within seconds, they disappeared into the trees, leaving behind only broken footprints and curses. David waited, then slowly lowered his rifle. Zorana stepped out, hands shaking slightly, but her eyes bright with fire. "You brave," she said softly. David turned to her, surprised. "You too." She walked closer and gently touched his shoulder. "You protect," he chuckled. "We protect. Together." Yulo crawled toward the entrance and peeked out. "Mama?" Zorana knelt, hugging him tight. "Safe. We safe." David looked at them and breathed deeply. He had no home out here, no reason to stay before, but now he had something worth protecting, someone worth protecting. The raiders never came back. Not after the flare, not after the traps, not after seeing a human and an alien mother ready to fight side by side. For 2 more days, the snow melted, slowly. The wind softened. The silence outside turned peaceful. And inside the small shelter, something even greater was happening. Zorana had begun to laugh again. Not loud, not often. But when Yulo tried to mimic David's gruff voice, or when David failed to eat her spicy alien root without choking, she'd cover her mouth and giggle softly. It had been a long time since her lips remembered how to smile. David spent most of his time reinforcing the shelter. He patched up the holes in the roof, gathered wood, set up a solar panel he had stored in his bag. The cabin now had warmth, power, a place to rest, a place to live. Zorana helped. She swept the floors with old cloth. She washed Yulo's face every morning, and she spoke more common tongue now, slowly but proudly. "You fix home," she told David one morning. He nodded. "Yeah, it's not perfect, but it's safe." She hesitated, then gently said, "You make it home." David looked at her, heart softening. He didn't have a home before this either. Not really, just a truck, a journey, a broken past. But here in the snow-covered silence, something new was beginning. That afternoon, David sat with Yulo near the fire, showing him how to fold little figures from scraps of paper. A tiny bird, a star, a crude 4-legged animal that made the boy laugh. Zorana watched from across the room, her head tilted, eyes full of wonder. "You teach," she said. David nodded. "Yeah, he's smart. Learns fast." She knelt beside them. "He like you?" David glanced at her. "I like him too." There was silence for a moment, a peaceful one. Then Zorana surprised him. She held out a cloth bundle. Inside were dried seeds, carefully saved. Small, fragile. "My mother give," she said. "Before storm, for new garden, for future." David stared at the seeds, then at her. You want to plant them here? She looked around. Safe place. New place. Maybe. Start again. He closed her fingers gently over the bundle. Then we'll do it together. By the next morning, the snow had melted enough for them to step outside and walk to the hill, behind the cabin. The ground was still hard, but the sun was warm on their skin. They dug a small patch in the soil. Side by side, they placed the seeds gently into the earth. Yulo clapped every time one was buried. Grow, he said softly. Jirana smiled at David. He speaks your word. David chuckled. He speaks our word now. When the work was done, they sat together on a large rock, watching the trees sway in the breeze. Birds flew overhead. Real ones, not machines. The world felt calm again. Jirana leaned her head lightly on David's shoulder. He didn't move. She whispered, Why? You help me? David took a long breath, then said, Because someone needed to. Because no one else did. She was quiet for a moment, then softly, You. My family now. David turned to her, eyes wide. What? She placed her hand gently over his. You save my child, you fight for us, you stay. Her voice shook, but her eyes were clear. You home. Yulo tugged David's sleeve and pointed to the seedbed. Grow! David looked at the boy, then at the woman beside him, then at the trees, the sky, the little shelter behind them, and he smiled. Yeah, he said. Let's grow. That night, the cabin felt different. There was light. There was warmth. There was laughter. David tucked Yulo into bed beside the heater and handed him a soft cloth animal he had stitched together from scraps. The boy hugged it tightly. Jirana stood nearby, arms folded, watching the scene. Before she turned to sleep, she whispered one last thing in her language, something David didn't understand, but it sounded like a blessing, or maybe like a new beginning. And as the stars shone down through the cracked roof and the snow slept quietly outside, one human, one alien woman, and one small child dreamed beneath the same roof, not of storms, but of spring.